A top Libyan official warns Europe could be flooded with African refugees unless the EU starts to work with the country itself. Also in our headlines this hour, the Pentagon accuses Baghdad's forces of lacking the will to fight Islamic State. But RT hears from an Iraqi minister who claims it's the US that lacks the backbone to join the battle. Plus, the list of European countries adopting Muslim-related bans gets longer, with the Netherlands introducing a partial ban on face-covering veils in public. From Moscow to the world, this is RT International. Ewan O'Neill with you this news hour. Welcome. There is no way the EU can halt the thousands of African refugees pouring into Europe unless it works alongside the authorities in Libya. That's the warning from the foreign minister of Libya's unrecognised government in Tripoli, which currently controls only around half of the country. He was pleading for direct help from Brussels. Mohammed Al-Ghorani claims that unless governments step up to the task, the whole European continent will be altered. Libya has been gripped by chaos since the NATO-backed toppling of Colonel Gaddafi 4 years ago. Well, Tripoli claims to have detained around 16,000 illegal migrants currently being held in overcrowded facilities. Now, Libya is a key hub for Africans fleeing to Europe in the hope of a better life. Last year alone, more than 170,000 people crossed the Mediterranean after passing through the country. The influx carries a heavy financial burden, while the issue of immigrants having to turn to crime to avoid poverty is a worry. There's also the danger that terrorists could be posing as refugees and the challenge of integrating foreigners into European society. While Amnesty International says Western governments are failing to address the root causes.
The international community has stood and watched as Libya descended into chaos since the 2011 NATO military campaign ended. World leaders must be prepared to face the consequences, which include greater levels of refugees and migrants fleeing conflict in Libya.
Well, instead of staying to help Libya, the EU evacuated the team it had sent to train local border guards. But the increasing influx has sparked some strong statements from Europe itself.
People are fed up with a system that allows those who are not meant to be in our country to remain here.
We are facing not an Italian, but a European emergency.
There might be foreign fighters, there might be terrorists also trying to hide, to blend in among the migrants.
Now, the EU is being forced to come up with a plan. The first idea was to share the migrant burden among its 28 members using quotas, a proposal that received little support from member nations. And just over a week ago, it unveiled another radical plan. It's approved a naval operation which includes reconnaissance, destroying smugglers' boats and raiding the bases of human traffickers in Libya itself. That could even mean putting European boots on the ground. The proposal requires approval from the UN. Well, for more analysis, let's now cross live to Chris Nineham, Vice Chair of the Stop the War Coalition. You're very welcome to the programme, sir. Just first of all, do you think targeting smugglers will be effective in stemming the flow of immigrants?
I don't think it'll be effective. I think it's a policy that combines deep inhumanity with real stupidity. One of the reasons, probably the main reason that has created this migrant crisis in the first place is the catastrophe that was unleashed on Libya, particularly back in 2011 by the bombing campaign by the West, which devastated the country socially and physically, as well as killing tens of thousands of people. And the idea that what is needed in these circumstances, faced with this appalling humanitarian crisis, is more bombs, more military intervention, leaves me virtually speechless, frankly. It's the last thing that we need.
How would you gather intelligence? Because it is a vital issue. Because isn't there a chance the EU's forces could destroy vessels with innocent people on board?
Well, absolutely. I mean, any so-called war on the traffickers will in practice end up being a war on the migrants themselves, because, you know, they're going to be, presumably, the idea is they're going to be attacking the boats, and there's going to be migrants on them. So that's the main and most obvious reason why this is a catastrophic decision and a very, very wrong-headed policy. But also any further Western military intervention in Libya itself, which is apparently and unbelievably now being considered, will only increase the level of anger and bitterness against the West, but it'll also lead to more destruction and more devastation. So that's the driver of the migrant crisis in the first place. So, as I say, I think this is just a phenomenally inhumane policy and a very, very misguided one, and it'll actually make the situation that it claims to be addressing much, much worse, apart from creating, you know, a huge amount of tension in the region.
Yeah.
It really needs to be rejected, and they need to think again.
The EU naval mission could also need to put boots on the ground, as we were talking about earlier, in places like Libya. How likely is that, in your opinion?
Well, I don't know. I'm not party to the decision-making process. I mean, it seems almost unthinkable that the people who orchestrated the disastrous occupation, the disastrous military intervention in 2011, could be considering further military action. I mean, it's almost as if the EU and the Western powers can only think, when they think of foreign policy, when they think of problem solving, they think of killing, they think of military solutions. This is clearly a situation where the military dimension doesn't even need to be raised. What is needed is, first of all, an acceptance of as many as possible of the suffering migrants into European countries so that they can live some sort of a life. And secondly, there needs to be a reconstruction effort. There needs to be a serious aid operation to begin to undo the massive damage the West has done in Libya and other countries. Because a lot of these people are coming, it should be remembered, from the Middle East as well, via North Africa. So, you know, the last thing we need is a continuation of the last 14 years of military operations, which have caused this and so many other crises in the first place.
Chris, just briefly, getting your thoughts on this. The first idea was to share the immigrants between EU member states, but members were not enthusiastic. Why do you think they were so reluctant to do this?
Well, I think that in many, many EU countries, the politicians have accepted or been pursuing a kind of narrative, which is that a lot of the social problems that exist in the countries are caused by migrants and caused by immigration, whereas in fact the statistics and the reality of the situation doesn't bear this out. But they've kind of capitulated to that view, and once you've done that, it takes on a logic that actually, you know, kind of stymies even the most basic compassion. So I think that the political classes are very much to blame for this. At a moment when the EU should be reaching out the hand of friendship and aid and help to people in absolute desperation, because of that political kind of logic that they've fallen into. They're closing the door, which is disgraceful, really.
Chris Nyhan, Vice Chair of the Stop the War Coalition. Thanks very much for coming on to RT International this hour.
Thank you.
The Iraqi city of Ramadi could be recaptured from Islamic State just within days, says the country's Prime Minister. It was seized by the militants last week, prompting an exodus of refugees. Hundreds, including women and children, are heading towards Baghdad. For several days, people fleeing from Ramadi have been prevented from entering the capital because the fear of jihadists could be among them. While the retreat of Iraqi troops from Ramadi led to accusations from Britain that local forces lack the, quote, moral cohesion to fight the enemy. That echoes the words of US Defense Secretary Ashton Carter, who claimed Baghdad's forces simply wanted to escape the fighting as quickly as possible.
The Iraqi forces just showed no will to fight. They were not outnumbered. In fact, they vastly outnumbered the opposing force, and yet they failed to fight. They withdrew from the site.
But when the US handed over security to Baghdad in 2011, it sounded more than confident about Iraq's troops. Then Defense Secretary Leon Panetta claimed that following the US withdrawal, the Iraqi army had been rebuilt and was capable of responding to security challenges as violence in the country had waned. As US optimism over the Iraqi army shrinks, Baghdad claims that one or two failures does not mean a collapse of the entire force. While Iraq's Interior Minister believes Washington itself could do a better job of fighting Islamic State, he spoke to RT's Sophie Shevardnadze.
We're receiving these views, but on the ground, we feel that it is not enough support from the Americans to defeat ISIS.
What would you need? What would you need from Americans? Because you say you don't want their boots on the ground because you feel like Iraqis only are the ones who should lead the ISIS out of Iraq. So what else would you need from the Americans?
The air bombing and the airstrike, they do this, but in a limited way, I think. We need more, targeting the enemy, ISIS. They have the equipment, enough, equipment to target ISIS. I think they can help us, to put the pressure on some countries that they still giving help to ISIS to, for the recruitment for fighters, foreign fighters, to financing and to support Daesh.